Imagine this, you're living in an empire that is at the height of its power. It's the land of law, art, and literature. Everything is at your fingertips, and the pursuit of knowledge is a sign of your status. Sounds like the world we live in today, right? But here's the shocking twist. What if I told you that the Romans, who pioneered some of the most sophisticated literary traditions in history, eventually stopped reading books? That's right. Over time, the Romans, despite their vast libraries and intellectual achievements, abandoned their love for books. But why did this happen? What could have caused such a drastic shift in a society known for its passion for knowledge? In this video, we'll explore the mysterious decline of Roman reading culture. We'll take a look at the rise of libraries, the birth of bookstores, and ultimately uncover why the once book-loving Romans gradually turned their backs on reading. Stay tuned. And before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because you're about to uncover one of history's most intriguing mysteries. You won't want to miss this. Roman literacy? Who could actually read? Let's start with the basics. Who could actually read in ancient Rome? At first glance, you might assume that being part of a thriving empire would mean high literacy rates. But surprisingly, only about 10% of Romans were literate. That's right, 90% of the population couldn't read. Class divide in literacy. The elite versus everyone else. Literacy in ancient Rome was primarily confined to the elite classes. The rich urban men had access to the best education, while the majority of the population, rural dwellers, slaves, and non-elite women, had no access to formal schooling. Education for the wealthy. Freeborn men in cities were more likely to know how to read, but their education was primarily focused on record-keeping, signing names, and other basic tasks, not on intellectual or philosophical pursuits. They were trained to be functional, not deeply literary. The intellectual elite. The Roman elite were different. They defined their identities through sophisticated literary education. Books, scrolls, and inscriptions were symbols of social status. The more intellectual knowledge you had, the more respect you commanded in society. Even the most powerful men filled their homes with texts, tomb inscriptions, monumental columns, and of course books. But here's the catch. These books weren't for everyone. Libraries, the intellectual heart of Rome. The elite weren't just reading any books. They were curating libraries. These libraries weren't just places of intellectual discovery. They were status symbols in their own right. The wealthiest Romans turned their homes into intellectual hubs, and libraries became a vital part of their public persona. Public libraries. The city of Rome boasted some of the grandest public libraries in the world. The Temple of Apollo and the Forum of Trajan housed massive collections of both Greek and Latin texts, symbolizing Rome's dominance over two of the greatest intellectual traditions in history. Libraries were the public access points to knowledge, open to anyone who could afford it. However, they were limited to the elite circles, and there was always a sense of exclusivity about who could access them. Private libraries. On the other hand, private libraries were the jewels of Roman aristocratic homes. These libraries were often housed in dedicated rooms with shelves made from rare woods. The Villa of the Papyri at Herculaneum is a prime example. Despite being a modest room in a villa, it contained over 1,000 scrolls, showing how deeply embedded books were in Roman elite life. The scrolls and codices, the evolution of books. Now imagine reading a book that stretches 50 feet long, and that's exactly how Roman books were originally made. Most Roman texts were written on papyrus scrolls, which, as you can imagine, weren't the most convenient or accessible format for widespread reading. The scroll. The typical scroll in Rome ranged from 10 to 50 feet in length, equivalent to 20 to 100 pages of printed text. This posed a serious reading challenge, as scrolls lacked punctuation, spaces between words and page numbers, making them hard to follow. And these weren't just academic texts, but everyday documents as well, ranging from legal texts to personal letters. The Codex, a game changer. Enter the Codex, the revolutionary book format that would ultimately replace the scroll. The Codex consisted of individual pages bound together, making it easier to read and handle. Initially used for practical reference, such as accounts or lists, the Codex would eventually dominate the literary world, largely thanks to the Christian Church's adoption of it. Christian texts, which were written in codices, spread across the empire and effectively displaced the scroll. Bookstores and booksellers. The birth of the book market. By the time of the early empire, Rome had become the true heart of the ancient book trade. The book market in Rome was unlike anything seen in earlier civilizations, and it played a crucial role in the spread of literature across the empire. Bookstores in Rome. Roman bookstores, known as tabernae librariae, were small shops that specialized in selling books. These stores were often found in high-traffic areas like Caesar's Forum. One of the most famous booksellers was Atrectus, who ran a store in a wealthy district and advertised his books by painting their titles on the pillars outside his shop. This was early advertising at its best. Booksellers as publishers. Interestingly, booksellers weren't just selling books. They were also acting as publishers. Authors would sell their manuscripts to booksellers for a lump sum, with the booksellers keeping the profits from sales. This means authors didn't earn royalties or ongoing payments. They were paid once and for all. This practice was very different from the modern publishing model, and it speaks to the deep economic divide between those who could afford books and those who couldn't. Affordable versus luxury books. Roman books came in various qualities. While some were luxury items bound in purple-dyed covers, which were incredibly expensive, others were more affordable, reused scrolls that were more accessible to the general public. However, the luxury editions were often much more coveted and were owned exclusively by the elite. Roman bestsellers. What did the Romans read? Now, let's talk about the actual books the Romans were reading. Did they just read philosophy and law, or did they also have their own versions of bestsellers? Virgil's Aeneid, the ultimate bestseller. Virgil's Aeneid was without a doubt the bestseller of its time. It was considered the foundation of Roman education, and it's likely that every elite Roman family owned a copy. Just like modern bestsellers such as Harry Potter, the Aeneid was taught to children as part of their education. It was the textbook of ancient Rome. Other popular works. Besides Virgil, Martial's epigrams were also incredibly popular. Romans read a wide range of literature, from serious philosophical treatises to lighthearted, often risque tales. This variety of texts shows how the Romans consumed both intellectual literature and entertainment, just as we do today with a mix of highbrow and lowbrow content. The decline of the Roman book trade. So what went wrong? Why did the Roman book trade collapse? The decline of literacy and reading in Rome is tied to several key historical events and shifts in society. The decline of the Roman Empire. As the Western Roman Empire began to fall, so did the Roman reading culture. Economic instability, foreign invasions, and the collapse of central authority contributed to the decline of intellectual life. Libraries, once filled with scrolls and codices, fell into disrepair, and books were no longer as accessible as they once were. The rise of Christianity. The rise of Christianity marked a shift away from secular literature. The Christian church focused on religious texts, and many of the secular books that had once been so important began to fade into obscurity. The focus on spiritual works left little room for the intellectual pursuits that once defined Roman culture. Monastic preservation. While Christian monasteries did their part to preserve some of the Roman literary tradition, it wasn't enough. Most of the once flourishing Roman book culture disappeared over time, and what remained was only a fraction of the intellectual wealth that once existed. The loss of Roman books, what we've lost. With the fall of the Roman book culture came the loss of countless ancient texts, the surviving fragments. Today, only a small handful of Roman books remain. Some works, like the Vatican Virgil, have survived, but they are incomplete. Much of Roman literature is now lost, forever gone to decay, neglect, or destruction. Why did they disappear? The crumbling of libraries, the collapse of the Roman book trade, and the shift in intellectual focus all played roles in the demise of Roman literature. What little we have left was preserved in monasteries during the Middle Ages, but those texts were only fragments of a once great literary world. Conclusion: what we can learn from the Romans. So why did the Romans stop reading? It wasn't because they didn't love books, they did. But as society changed, so did their cultural priorities. Political collapse, economic decline, and the rise of Christianity all played significant roles in the decline of reading culture. Now here's the big question for us. In this digital age, where ebooks and social media dominate, could we be headed down the same path as the Romans? Are physical books becoming less relevant in our world? Just like the Romans, are we too forgetting the importance of reading? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think books are still relevant today? Also, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share your insights with us. I'd love to hear your opinion on where reading culture is headed. If you enjoyed exploring the decline of Roman reading culture, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the conversation. What's next for books in the modern world? Will we continue to read, or will we follow the Romans' path? Stay tuned for more historical deep dives, and don't forget to check out our other videos on ancient civilizations. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.